Festival. Oh. Okay. Wyatt Festival Kalt Isquis Sumahat. My name is Tracey Kim Bonneau, and I am one of the matriarchs for the IM4 Lab. And today we're going to be getting involved in some culture jam, meeting some amazing artists and artistry, but a little bit about the IM4 Lab, and then after that we'll have a land acknowledgement. So the IM4 Lab was created by filmmaker Loretta Todd alongside media matriarchs Doreen Manuel Syilx, and of course myself. I'm working alongside these wonderful ladies. IM4 was developed as an inclusive space in collaboration with Emily Carr University to offer workshops, training, and Indigenous people in XR. IM4 is dedicated to indigenizing VR, AR 360 by supporting Indigenous communities to find effective ways to incorporate these technologies into educational, cultural, language, artistic, and commercial applications. We're really excited to have you here today, and we'd like to start with the land acknowledgement from Ocean Highland.
Squile, Shquen Tina Chantlas Lewat, Ohomeo. Chinepes Quikushamen Simtalat. Good day, my name is Ocean, and I come from the people of Tsleil-Waututh, the people of the inlet, and I carry the ancestral name Tsimtalat. I thank IM4 and VIF in this collaboration of these storytellers. I thank them for reaching out and acknowledging the people of Tsleil-Waututh, the people of Musqueam, and the people of Squamish, to move forward with their work in a good way to acknowledge these people of the land that they're working on, and collaborating in that way, and acknowledging the storytellers of this land to move forward with their storytelling work. And so I'd like to say Chin Quimentomi and Tamataquetsi Quian Snachum.
Limnant to Ocean for the land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from the Syilx territory here in the Okanagan in British Columbia, Canada. And it's my real pleasure to introduce these incredibly amazing, brilliant artists that are going to be part of a real conversation that I've been looking forward to. We had the opportunity to get to know one another through setting this platform up. And so I'd like to introduce Kite, aka Suzanne Kite, is an Oglala Lakota performance artist, visual artist, and composer. She was raised in Southern California with a BA from Cal Arts in music composition and an MFA from Bard's College, Milton Avery Graduate School, and is a PhD candidate at Concordia University. Kite's scholarship and practice highlight contemporary Lakota epistemology, that word, epistemologies through research, creation, computational media, and performance. I'm going to work on that word because I'm learning my language, and so this is all part of the process.
$10 word there.
Amelia is our next artist that I'd like to introduce. Amelia Winger-Bearskin is Haudenosaunee Iroquois of the Seneca Kagaya Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma Deer Clan. Amelia is an artist technologist who empowers people to leverage leading edge technology to effect positive change in the world. In 2019, she was an invited presenter to His Holiness Dalai Lama's World Headquarters for the Summit on Fostering Universal Ethics and Compassion. In 2018, she was awarded a MacArthur and Sundance Institute Fellowship for her 360 video immersive installation in collaboration with the artist Wendy Redstar, supported by Google Jump and supported by the Google Jump Creator Program. Exhibited at the Newark Museum and ASU in 2019. She is a Sundance Institute creative advisor and alumni of the New Frontier Story Lab and Festival AR/VR XR Tech Session. Oh, and AI. Before we continue on, we have to thank VIFMERSE, Creative BC, Western Economic Diversification, the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, and of course our ancestors that guide us through all of our processes as we embark on this important work that we're going to talk about today. So, how are you ladies doing?
Oh, it's so great to be here with you and with everyone watching live. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, so excited to be here. I'm glad we can be in conversation publicly. It's like, I think this is a good time to have this conversation. Should we introduce our practices a little?
Sure.
I think that would be amazing.
Okay, I can go first. Han Petuashte, Kite Machiapi, Los Angeles, Southern California, Hamataha, Malakota Ksto, Concordia University, Elwablawa. So I'm Suzanne Kite, Oglala Lakota. I am from Southern California, and I'm currently a student. I'm a candidate, PhD candidate at Concordia University. And so I just want to talk, just to contextualize just a little bit what my practice is, kind of concerning this project. I think my research and my artistic practice spans a lot of mediums. I'm mostly a composer. I mostly think about listening. And then the materials and technologies that I use are just kind of a way to do that. So the photo on screen is myself performing at Red Cat in Los Angeles. And so that's using my hair braid interface, which is part of a series of body interfaces I make in order to control sound and video, usually using some sort of machine learning system to complicate my relationship with the computer. And so one of the things I think about is how I can use these new mediums, such as machine learning, and now Amelia knows about this project I have with my partner Devin Ronneberg about deep faking. And so those are, to me, ways I can begin new relationships with technology, relationships in the Lakota sense. So to me, listening is that epistemological, that knowledge-making starting point. That's where listening is where I begin to have this relationship. So this photo on screen is a sculpture that Devin Ronneberg and I made last year. It was commissioned by the Bemis Center for Contemporary Art. And this is we're looking at it from below, looking up, and it is a series of hair braids and with a hand-built computer in the middle and other computers hidden up top. But it's an interactive piece where you're able to affect the sound and the lights by touching it. And most of my research is currently focused on developing Indigenous protocols for artificial intelligence. Because Lakota ontology already includes non-human beings within a different hierarchy, so my focus is really specifically the Lakota relationship with stones, which I think is so special and so informative, especially since computers are made of melted stones, and it's an extreme reduction of material, but I think it's really important for me to say that at the beginning of the process, when you mine things from the earth, that's where your relationship begins, and that's where a good or bad relationship can begin. So I think these pieces are kind of my way of exploring the limits of our ethical abilities to make art, and and a lot of my work is not about AI ethics. It's really about many things. But I guess in relationship to this conversation, that's what I'll show. I think the next slide is, I think, a picture of myself and my cousin, Corey Stover. So I make sure to include my family in as much as possible. So here is us standing beneath the hair braid sculpture, which is, so the hair braid, the lights in the hair are a story from my grandfather, that he was like, you should make art about my story. And I was like, okay, I will. Here we go. And so then it only seemed right to try to make relationships with this in the Lakota way. So this is Corey and I saying a blessing, asking for forgiveness to the metals in the sculpture. And I don't consider that part of the art. I consider that part of responsibility. So here's us practicing that. You can see my shoes, my moccasins that don't fit my big feet. And so next slide. This part of this research comes out of a paper that I co-authored with Jason Lewis and Noelani Arista and Archie Bachawis, where it's called Making Came with the Machines, available online, where we first tried to outline our feelings and our how we're going to think about making relations with artificial intelligence or just machines and in the future. So the next slide. So any day now, we're going to have our position paper out, which is the Indigenous Protocols and Artificial Intelligence. And so the one thing I really wanted to contribute to this conversation was not that I'm not an AI expert, I'm not a tech expert, I use a lot of technology, but what I do care about is how I want to be able to make anything ethically. And so this was an illustration by Kari Noe, who drew this, and we're thinking about having you can replace AI in the center of these streams with anything, any artwork, anything that humans make. And so all these streams are possible streams of protocol with steps along the way to say, especially the death cycle, like what are we doing with these things? What do we do with our stuff? Do we let it go back to the earth, or will it poison everything that it touches in the future? So, and then I think I'll end by showing this video called Listener. So this is an example of one of the first pieces I did with machine learning. And there's many parts to this. I think online, I just did a performance of this live on Sunday for the Kitchener-Waterloo Gallery for Soundings exhibition. And this, what you're seeing is like a growing Lakota, I call it the Lakota system. But these are, oh, it does have sound. Okay, I thought it didn't have sound. So it's got me talking, and it algorithmically rearranges my words. These are Lakota women's geometric patterns that are growing and growing and growing.
Bright white sunlit.
And then so in this piece, my hair braid interface controls some sound, and then the machine learning Wekinator listens to the sound and then controls the growing and changing of the shape. And then I look at the shape and then make my decisions. So that's just a little example of how I make work. Thanks.
Amelia, would you like to introduce your practice?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's so wonderful that I got to meet Kite and talk with her about some of her work recently with the Sundance New Frontiers Story Lab. So it's really great to every time I get to meet you, Kite, it's always over Zoom, and someday I hope it'll be in person. I get to see some of your work in person, but I just love hearing about your work. So thank you always for sharing it. So my name is Amelia Winger-Bearskin, and I am Haudenosaunee. I'm Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma Deer Fan, as was already mentioned by Tracey, but I just have to say it all the time anyways. And I am an artist and technologist, and I have been working in creative applications of machine learning technologies and virtual reality and other types of emerging technologies for a while now. I'm not very as young as the Zoom makes me look, which has been really fun. I started out my career as an opera singer, and I was asked to help out with a lot of the mechanical systems that we had in our performances. And I began to write more of the music, direct more of the operas, and then help with a lot of the computers and the machines and the robotics, because I had just a sort of side fascination while I was in school to study computer science. And so actually my first career and my entry point into technology was through opera, and I was a classical opera singer. And the works and the performances that I did started getting stranger and stranger for opera festivals, until people said, I think maybe you should try showing these things at museums. And so I started then at that point, what my work was called was art. And then the work that I do now is considered more computer science and machine learning. And so it's been really fun for me, because I always consider myself someone who gets to play and make amazing, fun things with technology, but it gets to be called all these different things throughout my life. And currently I am a developer evangelist at Contemple, which is another really fun and amazing title to have. I've never had that title before, and it's been really, truly wonderful. It's a role where you get to educate and empower developers. And I'm really happy to do that, since so many people helped me through my journey as a machine learning scientist, as a developer, and as an artist. I've created some virtual reality pieces that have been shown around the world, and I've also worked with the city of New Rochelle to help citizens co-design their city with city planners using artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and augmented reality. And for this project, we were awarded a Bloomberg Philanthropies prize of $1 million to help this same citizen toolkit to get extended into cities all over the world. So that's been a fun sort of citizen science and immersive technology project that I got to participate and lead and direct in New York, which was really fun, since that's my ancestral homeland. So that was very wonderful. And I have a clip of one of the virtual reality pieces that I made, and I would like to share it with you.
Also was very interested in VR, and I've always been an artist, a performance artist and a video artist. And I began my work in virtual reality very in the late 90s in a lot of these kind of simulatory environments and working with museums. We had sort of crazy types of headsets, but I made a virtual reality piece called Your Hands or Feet, and I'll show you a little bit about that.
There is that really crazy sound effect when the giant's leg gets shaved. That's this really strange sponge that I bought. That's the worst sponge ever. It's so bad at scrubbing dishes. And we sat there and we were listening to it and we're like, this is the sound of shaving a giant's leg. This is perfect. I started out kind of my creative career as a writer, and I was really interested in kind of experimental writing that leveraged different aspects of new technologies. So I got to this point where I was like, it's really fun to think about technology and how it's impacting us, but I would really rather be working directly with the technologies. I went to a grad program called ITP, and I learned how to code. In my last year of grad school, VR suddenly came onto the scene as like something that was going to be accessible for us to use.
You know, Sarah was the first person I had met as an artist who was just working in VR in a more playful way. We just started brainstorming and thinking of moments when you virtually give someone a piece of your life, like in daily life. If I'm talking to Sarah and I'm trying to explain to her how I felt that morning or what I was thinking about the future, very frequently we prototype those kinds of experiences with sayings or with metaphors. So I can say, like, I walked into that room and my stomach just dropped, or it was so like loud that I felt like my ears were bleeding.
Your Hands or Feet is a VR experience. It's an interactive exploration of new metaphors. The experience starts off where you're in kind of this surreal looking kitchen and you have in front of you a half dozen carton of eggs, and inside of each egg is contained an experience that has some kind of psychologically complex action to it that we hope acts as something that you think back on and you're like, wow, this is such a strange feeling. It kind of reminds me of, for instance, like that time that I felt like my hands were feet.
I don't know. I feel like my mind is a confusing machine.
What we're really doing here is we're creating these metaphors that like maybe don't exist but might apply in a situation as like the perfect way to describe this thing.
In the beginning, I started with a basic treatment, so I created a lot of 3D assets to just sort of mock up this world, sort of the look and feel. And we came up with this idea of having it be like a half dozen experiences from, you know, a half egg carton and how we would move from each space.
Landing on the visuals for any project is an interesting process. You know, you have to make something that feels true to something that you like, but it also has to be something true to what the other person likes.
Sarah said she had this amazing friend, Neve Bavarsky in LA, who was an illustrator. We reached out to Neve and, you know, showed him all of the reference imagery, showed him our very tight color palette of what we were trying to go for. And we were like, can you do the Neve version of Your Hands or Feet universe?
And then from there, we were like, how are we going to put this thing together? Because translating from 2D into 3D seems easy, but to keep the same visual style is not always so straightforward. It made a lot of sense, like, for us to approach it with a style that's inviting and not like depressing or scary, but just a little bit scary maybe.
It's really helpful to like take those two concepts and then give it to one person that can execute that so that it stays really consistent.
So we were like, let's try this tool, Medium, which is a 3D VR sculpting tool. And so we felt like, oh, this is perfect that we found this way to find like a slice of what we were interested in, a way that we can produce it in a really organic and fun way. And that's kind of how we landed on the visual style that we're at right now.
A lot of our music is going to be generative. So generative music is when you're really designing those whys, therefores, and ifs.
You know, normally you listen to a song and it's got the beginning and the middle of the end and there's like nothing you can do about it. But in an interactive song, there's ways that you can alter parts of it so that way you're sort of participating with the music. Every object that you pick up is like contains an audio track. Depending on which objects you interact with, you're really flushing out what the soundscape of that environment is.
Me and Sarah are doing all this work to create a really fun playground. We might have kind of serious concepts about the emotional resonance behind each of the interactions, which we have very long and engaged conversations about, like, even the physicality of grabbing that object, to that action has to be connected. So we want each of the interactions to also be analogous to a place and time that you might have had that feeling. Thank you. We had a lot of fun, obviously, making that piece, and we got to show it. It was part of the Engadget experience in Los Angeles, and we created an exhibition and installation with at the Ace Hotel and Theater, which is that beautiful old Mary Pickford Theater, which was my first time ever seeing it. So that was a lot of fun. And right now I'm currently a fellow with the Mozilla Foundation and MIT's co-creation studio, where I'm working on a project called Wampum.codes, which is both a podcast that features Indigenous technologists who are using emerging technologies and other technologies to do creative and impactful things in their own communities. And it is also a project that I'm doing with to create a GitHub repository of ethics for software developers. And so it's very, I feel really inspired to know that Kite is doing a similar thing with artificial intelligence, and to create a structure for and as you mentioned, Kite, not just for artificial intelligence and machine learning, but also to how you could create anything. And I think it's really wonderful that we're in conversation, because I'm really inspired by your work and would love to hear more about that.
I'm completely honored to again, I've watched the clips a few times, and we've had our conversations, and I feel really humbled to be able to witness your work as part of, our Indigenous communities and the direction that we're going in terms of storytelling. And I had provided you with some background information about what I know, because I can only come from a place about, my community and my territory and my learnings. And one of the concepts that is widely discussed by a philosopher and academic here, highly distinguished, is Dr. Jeanette Armstrong, and she talks about the concept of indigeneity, and also the concept of decolonization, and what that process looks like in terms of holding space, because as we all know, the history proves for itself in terms of the space that's being held now. In relation to the concept of indigeneity, and I'm wondering if we can talk about how you describe holding Indigenous space in an ecology, in our new ecology of Indigenous technological storytelling. What are some of the ways that you frame that in your work, and distinguish that as from where you're from, because you both indicated it was extremely important to indicate, where what your roots are, and where you're from within your communities. So, who'd like to go first?
Go first.
Okay. I think for me, it depends on the technology. And of course, there are some things that apply to all of the technologies that we get to use as collaborators. For me, with virtual reality, I like to think of it as a dream technology, because you're walking without walking, and speaking without speaking, touching without touching, transporting without transporting. And it reminds me a lot of dreams, and it makes me think of how important dreams are within my own cultural and other Indigenous cultures. And so I like to think of and try to think about each technology that I use and the ways in which it could carry wisdom to the next generations, and ways in which it has inherited wisdom from the previous generations and from all of our ancestors. So for me, with virtual reality, I think it's very powerful as a dream technology. With artificial intelligence, it's so much more closely mirrors the way that I think about the way that nature operates, because it has so many systems that seem as though they're predictable and measured and you can define them, and yet we have incredible variations in ways that we can predict those systems but can't really control them. And I think, so I like to think about artificial intelligence and machine learning in a similar way. It's very fun and inspiring the first times you start training a machine that you're working with, and you expect certain results and are always surprised, and sometimes the errors within those machine results look to me as ways that we have variations in nature. And I think I feel very inspired to look at algae systems and plant systems and cellular systems for the ways in which I think about holistic concepts with artificial intelligence. But that's really more in the actual making and creating with those technologies. That's less how I would feel about speaking about how those technologies function within our culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's so nice. It's so nice to know that people are working with similar, I think of them as like similar ethics, because I know that I try to think about my use of technology and the way I hold Indigenous space. I try to make sure I think of it always as Lakota space and Lakota logic, and try to move from that space out into the technology. Because before, when I was starting to use it, sometimes I even been doing things and then I soon find they are Lakota concepts, and I feel like much closer to them after, even though I thought they were not. But so, for example, when I first started to make compositions, I realized when I was making a piece of work, for example, I had an accelerometer piece in my undergrad thesis show, and when I put stones on the ground, it's funny, I was not dealing with Indigenous concepts at all when I made this, but actually I was putting stones on the ground in order to count them. Each time I put a stone on the ground, I would add a tone to an array. So then after about 80 tones, your brain tips over into infinity and it can no longer hear discrete sounds. It starts to hear noise. And then that's theoretical white noise. And, but when I did it, I was like, this concept, it's so, intellectual, whatever, but actually it was a physical act of me I was a violinist, classical violinist, before. And it was the physical act of me doing it that actually was what set off in my mind, like, oh, I should be dealing with this relationship between the computer and the body. And so then I was like, I need a system. I need a Lakota, not I hadn't got to the Lakota thing yet. I was like, I need a body interface. So I strapped accelerometers and iPhones to myself, and with the help of James Hurwitz, who helped code and arrange and put together my first body interface. So I wanted to have this circular relationship with the computer. And then as I started to realize I want to make sure I wasn't doing tech demo as art, which is, I think, always tempting. I always want to do that, but I want to make sure, I think tapping into the reason I wanted the body involved, the really deep psychological reasons I wanted the body involved, that's where it brought me to be like, okay, well, why do I need my body here? And why my body? Why now? And soon I don't know, years later, I read a biography of Siewert Youngbear, who's a singer, and he has this line where he's talking about how the body, you can't sing without dancing, you can't dance without singing. The body is always involved with Lakota, to me, with knowledge making. And so then I was like, I knew it. I knew my body had to be involved. I knew it was never far away. And my grandfather's always like, you're too much up here. Like, you need to be down here. You need to think with this. And I'm like, yeah. I know. I do that too much. But I think that's what makes the tech and makes listening, even if you can't hear, like the act of listening with the body. So to me, Indigenous or so Lakota, it's all down here and helps us escape from up here. So yeah, I think that's how I keep that Indigenous space. And then thinking about what materials are made of, then I just down a rabbit hole of Lakota stones and relationships with stones. So
Well, that actually brings me into the next part of the conversation that I really need to really think about one mentor that was teaching here at the Okanagan Center. And her name is, she's a well-known artist, and she works with cattails here in the Okanagan. And I was always interested as to why she was wanting to work with cattails and the motherboard, old motherboards from computers, and I was always really fascinated with that, but didn't understand, why the need to do that in terms of the story and the Indigenous story that she was forming, because she's a visual artist and a very profound Syilx visual artist. And so that's when I began to do some research more into why is it that, what is informing my work as an artist and as an individual that loves technology, works with technology, and knows that there's something there that I need to do, and I don't know why I need to do it. But I from a young age, I've grasped technology and found every excuse to work with tape recorders, working with, every VHS, and then going on and on and on. So getting into the next concept, in our Syilx language, we have a word in our language, and the word is timich. And timich is described as, in our language, as all living things, everything living, the rocks, the sand, the everything that is living on the earth. And so our traditional knowledge keepers within, our Syilx knowledge system remind us that everything we use and everything in everyday life is from the timich, is from all living things, which includes cell phones, technology, motherboards. And we're also guided by the principles that all living things have a spirit and an energy, because we know that because it's in our language, which means living, so if it has a spirit and an energy, we also know that we're acutely respectful and mindful of all living things and the concept of sustainability and reciprocity. So I was thinking about that in terms of the conversations and really looking at the work that both of you were doing. And I was interested in if you could tell me about your work and how concepts of non-human interaction, to me, all living things, with technology, and I know you've described it, but I want to kind of get into a deeper part of the conversation about how that non-human interaction with technology is so relevant in the work that you've done and possibly work that's up and coming.
I guess I can start.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful question and such a beautiful word. Thank you for sharing that with us, Tracey. With my current project that I'm doing, Wampum.codes, I was very, inspired by the cultural tradition that the Haudenosaunee have with wampum, and other adjoining tribes and nations share a similar way about thinking of consensus and consensus building. And I like taking people back to times when these so-called very cutting-edge modern technologies like blockchain or Bitcoin have had and what I have termed antecedent technologies. And with wampum being a distributed type of ledger that was contracts that were created through consensus and through the community, it was able to build, peaceful connections between all of our adjoining tribes, understanding how best to care for the land and how best to farm and feed each other and feed and make sure that we didn't overhunt in areas and take care of our brothers and sisters who were of animals and minerals and rocks as well. So I like to remind people that we had these antecedent technologies, that we have information around those antecedent technologies, and we essentially have data for hundreds of years that we can choose to engage with and to create models with for when we imagine futures or possible very near futures, honestly, when people put forth ideas of using, like people like me, using immersive technology for city design, or using blockchain as a way of building consensus for voting, or for commerce, or for currency. And I like to remind people that, 200 years before we had a modern computer, Incas used a form of knot tying that was Turing complete, right? So it was as Turing complete as the first computer that Ada Lovelace worked on was something that was 200 years prior. So we have these antecedent technologies, these computers, these Turing complete systems before Alan Turing was born. And I like to remind people that we can take that data and that information, because societies used it to build deep connections with the land, sustainable farming practices, ethical ways of developing governance, equality of men and women, and on and on and on, right? And everyone who's Indigenous in the audience is like shaking their head. Yeah, we know what you're talking about. But I like to include those in those conversations as being part of a narrative, and not saying that, okay, yes, when Western people discovered these technologies, that is when they were maybe said to have been invented, but this is part of a long history that humans have had with technologies. And I think if we remember that, we can include data that I hope will help us imagine bigger futures, possibly brighter futures, and futures that are not colonized. We don't need to colonize our futures.
Yeah, we do not need to colonize our futures. That is, yeah, exactly. I think the way I think about, so your question is about like non-human interaction with technology. And so one way I'm trying to work through thinking about this interaction, this interface, is trying to understand what the difference between a tool to the Lakota people, to my family, is versus a tool used outside. Like I know the term, there's lots of terminology in computation that does this, the user, all sorts of stuff. But like to think about, okay, so what is my relationship between my interface, this thing that mediates data between me and the computer, and its status as a non-human, even if does not necessarily have the Lakota, what David C. Posthumus, who's an anthropologist, points out as interiority. And so the thing that's really, I love going deep into this, and that's why I hope, dissertations, I hope my dissertation can get there. But thinking about how when I asked my grandfather about this, asked my aunt about this, the question is, the thing is that not all stones, not all things have this interiority, not all things have that status. And so I want to start to understand in our teachings yes, we are all related. We're all related, but it's not all. But there's so much specificity, rich conceptual, complex specificity. So some stones. So my grandfather says that there's some stones, when they roll to you out of the earth, and they've been looking for you their entire existence, which is so, so, so beautiful. And then to think about, okay, so what's my relationship to this tool mined from the ground? And then what is that non-human interactions with it? What does that mean? And so one thing that really hangs me up about how one stone chooses to come to you and the other one you go by and it's been mined is the non-human, the way that, let's say I allow that non-human entity, that mined metal or collection of mined metals, to let's say I elevate them beyond me as so important as to have their own interiority, even if I cannot know it because they're not named by us, they're not from our territory, that I can't have. What do I do? Because I know that those mined materials have relations in their territory to their indigenous communities, and so my hope, my dream is that I can get closer to understanding how we can repair those relationships, and how I, as a Lakota person using a mined material and a physical computational device, can have that relationship with where that device was mined from in the community, their relationships with their mined materials. So, that's kind of where my head's at with that, and it's a conundrum, and I hope to continue to make connections with people who are doing this work. And one thing I will say is that the one thing I try to do as a mental exercise, and I do this in this position paper that's coming out, is I try to say, like, okay, I'm building a physical computing device. Like, how can I look at a Lakota model, an ethical Lakota model of our protocol for doing that? So when we build sweat lodges, like we collect raw materials, and Corey Stover, my cousin, he points out to me that we would never harvest an entire family of willows and leave no willow left. You wouldn't do it, and you need to give more than you're taking. You need to leave your physical hair or your skin or your expensive, important tobacco. You need to give more than you take. And so just starting with that to build a computer seems impossible. And I really hope that our ideas of non-human interaction can become ethical one day.
Yeah, my desire was, I would love if, like, especially machine learning intelligence could help us better advocate for our planet and better understand those systems that so many of us our cultures have researched and been a part of that scientific understanding of our world for so long. It would be beautiful to me if it could continue and help us become better advocates and help us have better understanding, or a better way of communicating in their language. That would be my imagined future with AI. Would be that. I would love it if people could learn to have a deeper kin and kindred with the earth. There's definitely spaces that AI inhabits that I think it shouldn't, or it doesn't have a place, or it doesn't have a use, or is impactful or meaningful to the world and the planet in a positive way. And but I do hold that to be my hope, is that it could help us have more kin with our world, since environmental systems is something that AI, I could imagine it being well suited for. My sister, of course, is a data scientist who works on water systems, so I love to nerd out on her brain with thinking about AI.
Yeah, I think it's actually useful and kind of a great tool to try to capitalize on this Western sci-fi anthropomorphization. And I think I've rambled about this to Amelia already, but I think it's important that what's strange and maybe useful to think about, if this is the one non-human entity that Western scientists or the Western imagination can see as having an interiority, if you want to use that anthropology word, having some sort of inner world or maybe intelligence, that's also a very fraught word. If that this is the thing that they want to do, that they're ready to have relations with, then let's do it. Let's do it, and let's make relations with every single component of that thing, and then all of the stakeholders involved in every single creation of that. I think it's like an amazing opportunity. I think the one thing holding it back is that the idea of AI as man as God creating something in his image, and which is terrifying, because it'd be great if we didn't repeat that.
Totally. Absolutely. And we hear the way that people talk about it. If the machine becomes more intelligent than the man, then what is the man? And you're like,
man is not that intelligent anyway.
And also, like, the way that machine learning works is it has to have massive amounts of data, just absolute massive amounts of it. And that is not the world, right? That is somehow an individual, that is man. Like, no, that is like knowledge and data combined with context and metadata. There is a reason that it existed in a time when social structures are what became data, right? Like, it's a mirror of ourselves as social organism. But people still will ask the same kind of Frankenstein questions, right, around it.
Yeah, I think that I love to think about the hierarchy of intelligence and how that applies to this fantasy of what these machines are, because I always try to remind myself that bison to the Lakota are considered more intelligence, more important and more sacred, because they're willing to sacrifice for us. So they are, to me, far more intellectual and far more giving than we can ever be, because we don't do that for them. They give to us, And so I think that's how I see stones too. I don't know if can say sacrifice themselves. They transform in order to give to us in our ceremonies. And so all these things that transform, and I can't say that we are doing a good job of doing the same to them. So, maybe AI and machine learning will help us do that transformation.
Well, there's a term that is being used more frequently in our communities, and the term is traditional science, traditional ecological knowledge, in terms of the recovery of endangered species on our planet, and the idea that my understanding of traditional knowledge in science is that it, in terms of knowledge hierarchy, as you spoke of, it absolutely is the oldest science that you could actually draw from in an area. And when you think about, I'm thinking about the settlement just here in the Okanagan. So settlement here in the Okanagan has only been 200 years. And so when you're bringing a foreign concept of Western science to a group of highly skilled individuals that have an exact science that practice 100% sustainability, meaning 200 years ago, everything was sustainable. All of the non-human interactions, all of those ideas, there was always 100% sustainability every year, and there was no question about it. And so I wonder what we think about in terms of your research, and when you come across traditional knowledge, traditional science, and those concepts, and how it informs the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think for traditional science, I'm not an expert. I'm not remotely an expert. I think when I find examples that like speak to me so much, it's so powerful, because there is this difficulty in it. People really diminish traditional science. It's like English does not do it justice remotely. I mean, one of the essays that changed my life was this. I think it's the Leroy Little Bear and Ryan Heavyhead essay on, I think it's anatomy of the Blackfoot word, and it's so complex, explaining how I cannot grasp Blackfoot, but Blackfoot is a crazy language. That's all I got from it. Amazing language. And then, but there was like Leroy Little Bear's involvement with in conversation with quantum physics. There was this one phrase at the end of the essay where he mentions that, perhaps doing quantum physics, theoretical physics in Blackfoot would be more efficient, would actually work, and you can actually do the science. And that is so inspiring to me. I feel like a lot of the science, we see when science reaches plateaus, like what if AI reaches another one of those plateaus? And, what if we did this in other languages, with other ontologies, with other logics? Would that break us through towards ethics, towards new learning, I think that essay really inspired me. I was like, well, now I want to be a theoretical physicist, and now I want to learn Blackfoot, and that same thing with Lakota. I'm like, maybe Lakota is the best language to do a very specific, intimate research, knowledge making with a specific thing. Maybe it's stones. Maybe that's one of the arguments I'm making. Maybe I should just become a geologist. Give up art.
Well, a lot of what people talk about when they talk about ethics and AI is baked in a lot of fear. Like, we could be creating something Terminator style, right, that could like destroy us, or accidental something could happen and just we become deleted or obsolete. But I think a lot about how in Haudenosaunee storytelling, we would embed scientific lessons within each of the stories that we told. So you had to imagine, how can I've made a scientific discovery. I've tested it over, however, maybe my lifetime. I need to share this information, but it's not actually important in my culture to share it just with my friends or the whole world who's alive right now. that doesn't count. It has to count for 7 generations in the future. And it's the knowledge that has come to me from 7 generations in the past. So how do I do that? I have to decentralize the way in which I explain the scientific discovery. I have to create patterns within weaving. I have to have an oral story. I have to have it embedded in song. I have to have it, maybe we tell a story about the way in which the landscape is, and we create a character. Maybe that character is like a bear. Maybe that bear is like the mountain. Okay, great. You have this system where you have to embed this incredibly complex information of the science that you've discovered, but you have to imagine someone 8 generations from me may not understand the world in any way the way I understand it. So it's almost like I have to talk to this future child who understands like this much, which to me is very much like an AI actually right now. It's like this future child that understands this much. And so I think the Indigenous perspective of saying, okay, you know what, you cannot explain to the future how to care for yourself now unless you understand and speculate and decentralize your narrative. You create it in the landscape and in songs and oral histories. People from other cultures may say, oh, that's very, how primitive that you have this cute story about corn husk dolls to teach you all to be nice to each other. Oh, interesting. It's actually a scientific story. It's a story about harvesting, and it's about where to plant, and it's a story about rain and when to expect it, and then how to make sure that through sharing and through not having a vain, single-minded perspective, you are able to eat year after year in places that have a lot of snow and cold, right? Like upstate New York, where I'm from. So it's actually that system is very meta to explain to future generations your scientific discoveries. And now Western science is like, maybe your paper isn't interesting after 10 years or something, that's kind of what you're imagining, the length of your scientific discovery. Maybe you hope it would be a generation after your lifetime, but we have to start thinking about how do we explain our scientific discoveries and expect that they need to last for 8 generations, because we need to actually make impactful change with our environment and the way that we're approaching it. So I think that we do have a really unique scientific perspective, and it's not just the discoveries, it's how to discover and share.
Absolutely. And the great part about this conversation is that we have listeners that are listening in, and they're part of this panel, and they do have a few questions that they would like to throw to both of you. But just before we go, I just wanted to sort of dovetail that, Loretta Todd's Coyote Science, her program that she's created, really specifically informs Indigenous children what they already know. And so that, if anybody is out there, please check out Coyote Science, because it's an incredible program. So our first question is coming from Janice Tom. And so Janice's question to both of you is there a gathering of First Nations people in technology, specifically women in technologies, such as the Grace Hopper celebration? And she's asking, were First Nation people networking First Nation people in technology global or whatever? She wants to know about any information or any networks that you may know of that you could share.
That's such a great question. So my podcast, wampum.codes, wampum.codes, it does have 2 guests who are not women, but everyone else. And it's a great place where you get to learn about technologists and what they're doing from their cultures. They're all Indigenous. There is also the Indigenous Digital Delegation at MIT, which is it's across North America. But I think this next year will be fully international. That's another good networking space that I really like. And then, of course, I really love Imagine Native and other spaces like that, which is not just technology, but technology and media and art and lots of different types of cultural expressions. And then the Sundance Institute's Native program also has a lot of support for Indigenous technologists, and that's how I got to meet Kite, which is really great. But that's just a few. There's so many, but I would love to hear what Kite has to say too.
Actually, I was going to say that, that's a great question. Why don't we have, we should have like a chat room.
Yeah.
We should have a Discord. We should have I mean, I don't know if Facebook groups are
Oh,
still.
yeah, now that I remember, there is a Slack group. I'm going to pull it up right now on my phone because it is because I like that one actually a lot. Let's see, which one's it called? Natives in Tech. That's a very obvious name. Natives in Tech is really good. I like their Slack group, and then they have like webinars and other things like that. But I like that Slack there. It's pretty active. And it's not just developers. It's like, you know, kind of across tech. You can have people who are just tech recruiters, you know, and you can have people that are just, hey, I have a JavaScript question. Can anyone answer? You know, it's very kind of like all over the place. Yeah, but I like it.
I will join.
It's fun.
And the obvious platform is as well is the IM4 Lab, you know, because the concept that, you know, Loretta taught as the creative director for, you know, the IM4 Lab is to provide technology training to communities free, because the idea that technology is very expensive and is unattainable possibly for communities, you know, within our you know, within our nations. The project launched by, you know, going to some communities that were outside of the greater Vancouver area, and went up north and went to other communities. And so I know that that question is I totally agree, is a great question. That is something that, you know, I think that the IM4 Lab should look at expanding on, so that we can network and we can inform one another's work.
I thought of one more. I'm going to think of a million all night now, but NDN Collective just released today a grant for artists, and they have a lot of virtual reality creators and immersive and AI creators in the panel that is going to be making those decisions. So it does not exclude any kind of technologist within that artist category. So NDN Collective, I highly recommend that. Just dropped, I think, yesterday or today. So highly recommend. There's not, you know, sometimes with artist calls, they don't accept art that it uses technology, but with NDN, they're very hip and with it. I love them.
Amazing. And for those artists that I heard you mention Imaginative, that's a festival in Toronto here in Canada, and just wanted to, you know, if any of the people online weren't familiar with Imaginative, that's held every year in Toronto. Although I don't know how they're going to be handling it this year with COVID.
It'll be virtual. Yeah, it'll be like what we're doing now, bunch of Zoom calls. So, yeah.
That might create more access and more awareness. So
yeah, I'm excited.
I have another question, and the questions are coming in. So the question is, can you recommend training that one should take for virtual reality or AI future technology?
I'd say the tools I've used to experiment as an artist have, first of all, been the Wekinator, and there are courses on there these are machine learning tools. So there's Wekinator, which is a tool, and it's for artists and mostly dealing with OSC messages, so it's easy to include with sound and video experiments. And there's a lot of documentation. There's a free course on Wekinator.org. And then the other one I like to use right now, if you want to play around with the GPT-2 text model, is talktotransformer.com. And then to play around with style transfer and other image-based ones, I recommend the free software Runway ML. I think it's runwayml.com. If anybody from those things are listening and they want to sponsor it, I'm trying to get a workshop together to help Lakota kids learn how to use those things. So I hope they call me and say they have computers for us to use one day so I can teach them how to do it. So yeah, those are the tools that I find to be accessible. And then there's a lot of Google. I mean, the Google Colab for GPT-2 is excellent. It like holds my stupid little hand as I try to learn how to do everything. So that's been helpful. And then trying to think, Yeah, and I mean, the Google machine learning stuff was very useful for the basics. Yeah.
I also recommend the course called ML4A, and it's the letter M, L, and then the number 4A, and that stands for Machine Learning for Artists. And it's not just for artists, it's really for anyone who's getting started and maybe is coming from a different background than computer science. It's created by Gene Kogan in collaboration with Francis Singh, and part of it was created in my machine learning lab. And I just looked at it yesterday, and it just has so much contribution, and it's kind of done like a book with chapters, and you could do like the styles transfer one, or the words one, or the images one. And so I definitely recommend that as a course, and it's a pretty healthy and active GitHub. So if you have questions and you want to make pull requests, someone, it's fairly active. So that's a kind of a good place that I like to start for machine learning. For when it comes to virtual reality, Unity has incredible tutorials. And when you download the free version, you can go through the tutorials and go online. You can get pretty far. You can make a 3D Pac-Man by the time you're done with just the first two, which is incredible. So, and each one of them is about an hour long. And they have a pretty good like developer evangelism program. That's like what I do for my company. They also have a very good program too that can reach out, especially if you're an educator and you want more support, you can reach out to their developer evangelism team and talk to them about, any type of more resources that you might need that are specific to your the creatives that you do. I really love the tool Medium for prototyping, which I said in my little video as well. It was founded by the Oculus team. It was then purchased by Facebook, and now it just got purchased by Adobe. So it's still being supported, and it's something that you can actually sculpt with your hands to make 3D objects, and then you could export those as OBJs and then import them into Unity so that you can have your objects that you've sort of made with your hands. So and then Google has a similar one that they do that's more boxy, kind of Minecraft style that you can create. So there's a couple of nice, fun prototyping materials that it's not to say that that's the aesthetic that you'll stay with, but for me, it can help with my gameplay prototyping, right? Like I don't want just the fact that I need a tree to get in the way of me figuring out how I want this whole story to be told. And so they can be really quick and nice prototyping tools, and getting started to even see if you like this. Like, what if you don't like doing virtual reality? You can try it out, and you can see if your story makes sense in that space. You can put on a headset or scroll around on your computer and be like, do I even like this? The same way that you would with maybe sketching something to decide before you want to paint it, or taking a photograph of it before you decide if you want to make a film there, right? So there are great kind of easy prototyping ways that you could make a whole VR experience. Maybe it can help with like a grant application if you're saying, I want to study this. Okay, here's the prototype of what I think I want to do, but I need support. So those kind of tools I really like. And, Google has one and then this Medium one, but also, like the large companies that are investing in these virtual reality headsets do have nice prototyping tools because they want to empower creatives to move into that space. And so those main players are like HTC with their Vive, Facebook with Oculus, Google with the 360 video that's embedded in YouTube. And they do have these kind of grants and things for creators to get started in those formats. So.
That's some excellent information. And I'll just share, when I first joined the IM4 Lab, one of the things that I really had to do was immerse myself in the idea of VR literacy and XR literacy and AI literacy. And so one of the things that we kind of we did beta testing on is to provide workshops just on the language itself, in terms of the specific terms, as artists. Okay, what does metadata mean? What does is it haptic mean? And all of those terms. And the other thing that I did was I went and did a lot of research in the different methods. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and so the immersive experience and immersive VR in terms of what I'm going to do and how I research that was important to me. So, for anybody that's listening, please make sure to go onto our IM4 website, because we are providing workshops that are free. And because of this pandemic that's happening, a lot of those workshops are going to be, going virtual. So that is a perfect opportunity to be learning and getting some training. So we do have another question here. And this question is, how does your respective communities view or engage with your work?
I'll share my favorite time that my community engaged with my work. I was very grateful that the gallery in Rapid City, it's called Racing Magpie. They have artist spaces, and then they have a gallery, and they were really gracious to let me come in and go nuts with all the tech stuff. I showed up with like 2 full suitcases of gear, and they let me put together a thing, and it was so wonderful because I wrote this piece that we looked at earlier, Listener, and I had shown it in, I can't remember if it was before or after. I showed it in Montreal, and I ended up showing it at Linz, Austria for that one tech festival. I can't remember what's it called in Linz. But I felt like the audience didn't get it. Like people would ask me weird questions after, weird native pointed questions. One man was like, it involves a long hair braid, a 50-foot hair braid. And he was like, I collect all of my hair too. And I was like, oh my God, like that is not what this is about. So anyway, I was blessed to be able to show it near my community enough so my whole family could come see it. And I'll never forget, my Aunt Angie, she came in, she looked at the whole installation, and at that point, she didn't remember that I was her, that I was related to her at this point, because I hadn't met a lot. But she looked in and had the words up on the piece on the wall, and she's like, that's from this prophecy. This must have been your dream. That means this. That means that. I get it. Got it. Like contemporary art, like no big deal. And then she's like, who are you again? I was like, my aunt, like you're married to my uncle. But when she did that, I was like, okay, it wasn't me. It was the non-native audience. It was not my family that made me feel like the work wasn't reading. And so, that when that happens, when I successfully make layers for different audiences, then I feel like I've succeeded. Like that, like I can't even describe how it feels to be seen and understood by my own family, and for them to understand what I'm trying to say. I think other than that, I mean, I don't think my grandfather reads my academic writing, but I make sure he's if we are in discussion for something, he's co-author, and make sure things are co-written with my cousins, my aunts, so they're gonna rack up academic citations or something pretty soon. But I keep, even if they don't get to see the work, or I don't make online work so much, we make sure to be in collaboration and in conversation like every week. So
yeah, I love to collaborate first with my family. I'm glad to see I'm not the only one. I don't actually know very many Indigenous artists that don't collaborate with their family, and I'm so happy about that. Because I got to, of course, my son, I think, was in, so many of my early performance pieces and films. And it's been wonderful to collaborate with my sister, who, as she goes in her journey as a data scientist with water systems, and having this podcast where sometimes I will talk to someone who I've known about for many years, but I've never actually gotten to talk to them. And then we're like, oh my gosh, we sound like a bunch of aunties in the kitchen just chatting about all these amazing technologies together. And I think that I create all of my work first for my family. And then that family maybe can extend to all Haudenosaunee people. And I'm just really still pleased and pleasured that other people are interested in it too. But I do create it first for that community. And I think the great thing that I'm always striving for in any, whether it's an educational program that I'm creating or artwork or a piece of writing, is hoping that I have a clear message. And then I think it can, and it's always generous when other cultures can take something from a clear message. And so for me, having it be clear is making sure that I see the reflection of it with my ancestors and my family. Then I think it's clear.
Yeah, I wanted to add actually that that when I first recently I was able to like really psychoanalyze myself and identify my audience, and I think because I realized that I wasn't like aggressively trying to make it for my family, like, and on one level one layer is for them and one layer is for contemporary art viewers, and but I finally was able to identify I'm adopted and I consider my mother was adopted, and I consider us like forcefully removed, relocated, in diasporic Lakota. And there's a lot of us in LA. And when I finally figured out that what I wanted, who I want to make for, and who I research for, is for the other versions of me who Google Lakota art and want to find themselves. You know, I felt very, very, very alone. And I'm sure my mother felt very, very alone. I'm sure her mother felt very, very, very alone out being alone as an urban Indian. And I'm making art for those of us who feel that way and have in the past and in the future. So yeah.
That's really beautiful.
That is very beautiful, and I wanted to share with you a colleague of mine. I had I put together a think tank, and we were talking about origins of resistance and how our resistance and the ways that we resisted retained our ways, and you know, in spite of efforts to banish us and abolish us and genocide and all of that. And one of the things that my journalist colleagues said really struck me, and I'll never forget it. It was Doug Cuthand, and Doug Cuthand is a journalist in Canada, and he's from the prairies, and he said, when I do films or when I write my work, I'm doing my work to help my people. And he said, when you examine Western work, non-Indigenous work, you will rarely find a European individual saying, I'm producing my work because I want to help my people. And so that story kind of, I was reminded of that when you shared that, Kite, and that's so beautifully told, because those are the things that we know are happening, but it comes like as an evolution of our practice, and I just want to thank you for sharing that, because for me, it's like, why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep telling these stories? Why can't I just go off in some direction and I keep getting drawn back to my community and my family. So we have another question, and this question is from Shasha, and the question is, at what point did your music help you untangle your Indigenous connection, or was it your academia? And then there's another part to the question, meaning, it was an emotional, was it an emotional shift or a mental bridge?
Personally, I mean, the music thing was just, I see academia and music and whatever this is that I do, whatever you call this career, I see it as just like a way I can open doors and have opportunities that I would never be allowed into. Like, why would I, I wouldn't be allowed these opportunities unless I like did art. There's other careers I could have done, of course, but I felt like this is the only thing that I could sustain myself with. But untangling my identity, that's a more complex thing. But I think there was a death in my family, and that person was a gatekeeper between me and my identity, and because it was a very complex thing. But once that person had passed, I was like, my family was like, the door's always been open. We always wanted you to come in. We always wanted you here. And I just didn't know it. No one ever told me. And so then I was finally able to use, and so that's why I see the opportunities available in art for me to explore and ask questions that I wouldn't let myself ask, like have conversations I wouldn't I'd be too scared to, but I'm a performance artist, so I'm scared of nothing, or whatever, but I'm terrified of at certain conversations. But because of art, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ask the question that is hard, and then show everybody afterward more terrifying. So that's how I untangled it. I mean, it was like forced upon me to untangle, and then the art just helps me, it's like free therapy.
Totally. I guess I had like a reverse life to Kite in some ways, where we both started with music. And then I went into the academy. I was a professor at Vanderbilt University, and got to spend my 5 years in the institution. And at that point I had been in school for so long, sort of. I went right from graduate school to being a professor. Some call that, being institutionalized, as you say, which was very fun. And then I decided to make a break, actually, and I left the tenure track, and I left academia, and I went into the tech world, like capital T tech, and I work for a capital T tech, a tech unicorn and all of that, and it's been very fun for me. And I don't know. It's kind of fun to be able to do all of these different. Didn't think I'd be able to do these things, so it's been really fun for me. I loved the academy. I loved teaching, but I also love making things and learning things in different in formal and informal settings. And no one can ever stop you from being an educator, no matter what your title is. You're an educator because it's your responsibility to your community. And I love learning all the different ways that I can support my community with it or without titles attached to it. And it's, I currently have a title that is connected to educating a community, and it's just fun to see all the different ways and shapes that can be. And my mother was an educator. She was the first in her family to get a degree, and she got a PhD from Cornell, and it was in, sort of learning sciences. And she was the educational director at Okanagan, which is a state historic site of the largest Haudenosaunee city in the United States. And so just watching her as an Indigenous educator, researching at that historic site and then teaching the public about that. That's the first time I learned how to play music. Was she's like, hey, we have to demonstrate how to use this rattle, and we have to use this flute and this song. And I'm like, great, how do you do that? My mom's like, I don't know, you have to figure that out. So, my mom is like the least musical person. But, so that's, I'm like 6 years old performing with my mom on stages, at all these places to say, like, we've discovered this type of drum in our archaeological dig, and Amelia will demonstrate how to use this. But, you learn from all the wonderful people in your community, and they teach you, and then you learn yourself too, because you learn how to make them, and then you learn how to play them, and these things are so connected and beautiful. So, yeah, I don't know. I know the question was for Suzanne. I just jumped on.
We're both musicians.
I know I have to keep myself from answering the question too.
Jump all you want.
So I've been told that we're running out of time, and before we go to our DJ Classic Roots. I really want to thank you both for informing, the people that are viewing, but also yourselves and one another in terms of the work that you're doing, the incredibly important work that you're doing as an individual, and then with your families, and then your community, and our nation and our planet. And Loretta had spoke to us, last Saturday, and really talked about, could we be involved in, could we talk about technology and these experiences and come from a place of love? Like, can we talk about that? Can we have that conversation? And I really believe that that's, what my, in closing, I would say, I had asked my grandmother, like, about, medicine, like how, what kind of medicine can I need some medicine. I'm like feeling this way or that way. And she said, the most powerful medicine that we have on this planet is love. And if we incorporate that into all of our work and all of our thinking and all of the way that we do things, and in this new world of technology, and how we embrace that, we can achieve anything. And so I've had the most wonderful hour and a half of listening and learning from both of you. I hope that we can continue on with this type of knowledge transfer series, and hopefully one day we will meet in person. I put it out there. So thank you for your knowledge. And if you have any closing words that you would like to say, please do so now. And then if not, we can. I'll give you a few seconds to say some closing comments. If you're good, you're good.
Yeah, I'm in Pilmiaye. Like, thank you so much, and thanks for you and all these matriarchs. That's such an amazing model, and the leaders. I really, really acknowledge and am grateful for the leaders, especially women, and who have come before me in technology and made it normal for me to work in this field. Latecomer, but I couldn't be doing it without the people who came before. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm just so honored to be with everyone here. Thank you so much, Kite and Tracey and the whole team at IM4. It's an inspiration, and thank you so much for existing and then letting us come and play.
And next we have some culture jam from Classic Roots.